Amy walked through the crystal gardens of Silvermoon with her two baby dragons perched on her shoulders. The morning sun made their golden scales shimmer like tiny jewels. Spark was the smaller one, always curious about everything, while Flame was bigger and more protective of Amy. The elf city was beautiful, with tall spires that reached toward the clouds and bridges made of living wood that grew between the buildings. Amy worked as a healer in the main temple, where she used her magic to help sick people and injured animals. Her dragons were special gifts from her grandmother, who had died last winter. The old elf woman had found the eggs deep in the ancient caves and knew they would hatch for someone with a pure heart Amy had raised them from the moment they broke out of their shells. Most elves thought dragons were just legends from old stories, but Amy knew better. Her grandmother had taught her the ancient ways and told her that dragons would return when the world needed them most. Amy did not understand what that meant until much later. The dragons ate small fish from the temple pools and loved to play with the wind chimes that hung from every building. They could already fly short distances, and their fire was just tiny sparks that tickled instead of burned. Amy loved them more than anything in the world. Life in Silvermoon was peaceful and happy. The elves grew their food with magic and their buildings from living trees. They had no armies because they never fought wars. Instead, they spent their time making art and music and healing the sick. Amy often sat by the great fountain in the city center where children came to see her dragons. The little ones would squeal with delight when Spark and Flame did tricks like chasing their own tails or breathing tiny puffs of colorful smoke. The fountain showed images of the past and future in its swirling waters. Amy had seen strange visions there lately of dark ships in space and fire falling from the sky. But her elders said the fountain sometimes showed nightmares instead of real prophecies. 3 weeks before the invasion, Amy noticed the animals acting strange. Birds flew away from the city in huge flocks, and forest creatures hid in deep burrows. Even Spark and Flame seemed nervous, constantly looking up at the sky as if watching for something. The temple priest said not to worry, that sometimes animals sensed weather changes before elves could. But Amy felt a growing fear in her heart. Especially when she looked into the fountain waters, the dark visions were getting stronger and clearer. One night, Amy dreamed of her grandmother standing in a field of fire. The old woman looked sad and afraid. She told Amy that the time of testing was coming, and that she must be brave. The dragons would grow strong, but only if Amy believed in them. When Amy woke up, Spark and Flame were curled against her, making soft, worried sounds in their sleep. She held them close and promised to always protect them, no matter what happened. The next morning brought news that made everyone in the city excited. Traders from the outer worlds had arrived with stories of new discoveries and distant planets. The elves loved hearing about other places, even though they rarely left their own world. But Amy noticed that the traders looked worried when they thought no one was watching. She overheard them talking in hushed voices about something called the Zeth Empire and how whole planets had gone silent in recent months. The head trader was a nervous man who jumped at sudden sounds. He told the city council that communication with several worlds had been lost and that refugee ships were fleeing from the outer rim. The council thanked him for the news but did not seem concerned. Amy tried to ask the trader more questions, but he quickly packed up his goods and left with his crew. She watched their ship disappear into the stars and felt the cold touch of fear in her stomach. That evening, the fountain showed her the clearest vision yet. She saw massive dark ships arriving at Silvermoon and energy beams destroying the beautiful crystal gardens. Elves were running and screaming while their city burned around them. Amy ran to tell the council what she had seen, but they dismissed her concerns. They said young healers often had vivid imaginations and that the fountain was just reflecting her worries. The city had magical shields that would protect them from any danger. But Amy knew something terrible was coming. She could feel it in her bones and see it in the frightened eyes of her dragons. Over the next few days, she secretly gathered supplies and hid them in the old tower at the edge of the city. The tower had been abandoned for years, and most elves avoided it because they said it was haunted. Amy climbed to the top and found it was the perfect place to watch the sky. She brought blankets and food and water enough for several days. Spark and Flame seemed to understand that something was wrong. They stayed close to Amy and practiced flying higher and farther than ever before. Their fire was getting hotter too, and Amy wondered if they were growing faster because of the approaching danger on The last peaceful night, Amy sat in her garden listening to the wind chimes and watching the stars. She held her dragons close and tried to memorize every detail of her beautiful home. The crystal flowers glowed softly in the moonlight, and the air smelled like jasmine and magic. Amy did not know that high above in space dark shapes were moving toward her world. Ships filled with cruel aliens who destroyed planets for sport. The Zeth Empire had found Silvermoon and marked it for death. Tomorrow would bring fire and terror and the end of everything Amy had ever known. But tonight she was still just a young elf healer with 2 baby dragons dreaming of better days to come. Amy woke to the sound of screaming and the smell of smoke in the air. Spark and Flame were already awake, chittering nervously as red light flickered through her bedroom window. She ran outside and gasped at what she saw. Massive black ships hung in the sky like dark clouds blotting out the stars. Beams of green energy rained down from them, turning the beautiful crystal gardens into puddles of melted glass. The elegant spires of Silvermoon were cracking and falling as the alien weapons struck them. The magical shields that the Council had trusted were flickering and failing under the constant bombardment. Amy watched in horror as one of the temple towers collapsed in a shower of sparks and debris. Elves were running through the streets carrying whatever they could save. Amy grabbed her emergency pack and called to her dragons. They flew to her shoulders just as another energy beam struck her house. The building exploded behind them, throwing Amy to the ground. Spark and Flame shielded her with their small bodies as burning pieces fell around them. The city was in chaos. Elf guards were shooting arrows and magic bolts at the alien ships, but their attacks bounced harmlessly off invisible barriers. The invaders seemed to be playing with them, destroying one building at a time instead of finishing quickly. Amy ran toward the old tower, dodging falling debris and panicked crowds. The streets were full of wounded elves crying for help, but there was nothing she could do. The healing temple was already destroyed, and her medical supplies were buried in the rubble. A group of children had gotten separated from their parents and were huddled in an alley. Amy gathered them up and led them toward the tower. It was farther from the city center and might be safer. The dragons flew ahead, scouting for danger. As they ran, Amy saw things that would give her nightmares for years. Elf families being vaporized by energy beams, ancient trees that had grown for thousands of years, burning like candles. The fountain that had shown her visions was now a crater filled with twisted metal. The alien ships were enormous and covered in spikes and weapon ports. Amy had never seen anything so ugly and threatening. They moved slowly and deliberately like predators playing with wounded prey. The sound of their engines was like thunder that never stopped. When they reached the tower, Amy helped the children climb the old stone stairs. The building was cracked but still standing. She made them hide in the safest room while she went to the top to see what was happening. From the tower, Amy could see the whole city burning. The aliens had landed troops now. Strange creatures in dark armor were marching through the streets. They were tall and thin with too many arms and faces like insects. The Zeth soldiers carried weapons that fired bolts of purple lightning. They seemed to enjoy destroying things slowly, rather than just killing quickly. Amy watched them tear apart the library where thousands of years of elf knowledge was stored. Some elves were fighting back with swords and magic, but it was hopeless. The alien armor protected them from everything the elves could throw at them. When an elf got too close, the Zeth would laugh and vaporize them with their terrible weapons. Amy found a communication device dropped by a dead alien soldier. She did not know how to use it, but Spark seemed interested in the strange buttons. The little dragon breathed on it, and somehow made it work. Alien voices filled the air, speaking in harsh clicking sounds. Amy could not understand their language, but she could hear the tone. They sounded pleased and excited, like children playing a fun game. She realized that destroying her world was entertainment for them, not war. It made her feel sick with anger. Throughout the day, more alien ships arrived, bringing fresh troops and bigger weapons. They set up strange machines that hummed with power and pointed them at the sky. Amy wondered what they were for, since they had already won. The children in the tower were crying and asking for their parents. Amy tried to comfort them, but she was just as scared and confused. She gave them what little food she had and told them stories to keep their minds off the horror outside, Spark and Flame were growing restless. They kept flying to the window and making angry chirping sounds. Their scales were getting brighter and their fire was hotter than before. Amy wondered if they could sense something she could not as night fell. The alien ships turned on bright searchlights and began hunting for survivors. Amy watched helplessly as groups of hidden elves were discovered and killed. The Zeth seemed to have sensors that could see through walls and underground. Amy used a broken mirror to signal other survivors in distant buildings. She saw answering flashes from at least 12 locations around the city. That meant some of her people were still alive. But for how long? The alien communication device crackled with new transmissions. Amy listened carefully, trying to pick out any words she might recognize. She heard the word human several times and something that sounded like numbers. Maybe coordinates. Amy had heard of humans before. They were a new species that had recently joined the galactic community. Most aliens thought they were weak because they had no magic or special abilities. But something about the way the Zeth said their name sounded different. The aliens seemed to be expecting something. They were setting up defensive positions and bringing more weapons down from their ships. Amy wondered what could make such powerful invaders worry about anything. One of the children asked Amy if help was coming. She did not know what to say. The galaxy was huge and Silvermoon was far from any major trade routes. Even if someone wanted to help, they might not know what was happening here. Amy held Spark and Flame close as explosions continued to light up the night sky. Her beautiful home was dying and there was nothing she could do to save it. She thought about her grandmother and wondered if the old woman had known this day would come. The dragons seemed to be listening to something Amy could not hear. They tilted their heads and made soft questioning sounds. Their eyes were getting brighter and they kept looking up at the stars as if waiting for something. Amy followed their gaze but saw only the alien ships and the smoke rising from her burning city here. Wished she could understand what the dragons were trying to tell her. Maybe they knew something about the future that she did not. Tomorrow would bring more death and destruction as the Zeth finished their cruel game. Amy could only hope that some of her people would survive long enough for help to arrive, if help was even coming at all. The second day of the invasion was worse than the first. The Zeth had stopped playing games and started the real killing. They brought out bigger weapons and began systematically destroying everything that still stood. Amy watched from her tower as they leveled entire districts with single shots. The aliens had divided the city into sections and were clearing them one by one like farmers harvesting crops. They used flying machines to hunt down individual elves and seemed to compete with each other for the most creative kills. Amy had to cover the children's eyes many times. Spark and Flame were acting very strange now. They kept flying in circles around the tower and breathing fire at empty air. Amy thought they might be going crazy from all the stress and noise. But then she noticed they were always looking in the same direction, toward the edge of space. The alien communication device had been chattering all morning with urgent messages. Amy still could not understand their language, but the tone had changed from playful to worried. Something was making the Zeth nervous and they were calling for reinforcements. Amy saw more ships arriving throughout the day, but these were different from the invasion fleet. They were sleeker and moved with military precision. Instead of joining the ground attack, they formed defensive formations around the planet. The Zeth commander was giving rapid orders and his voice sounded angry. Amy heard the word human many times along with what sounded like curse words in the alien language. She began to hope that maybe someone was coming to help after all. Late in the afternoon, Amy spotted something new in the sky. Tiny dots of light that moved differently from the alien ships. At first she thought they were meteors, but they were too organized and moving too fast. The dragon started making excited chirping sounds. The dots grew larger, and Amy could see they were ships much smaller than the Zeth vessels, but there were hundreds of them. They moved in perfect formation like a school of fish or a flock of birds. The alien communication device went crazy with panicked transmissions. Amy had never seen anything like the way these new ships moved. They danced through space, avoiding the alien weapons with impossible grace. Every shot the Zeth fired missed by inches, as if the newcomers could predict where the beams would go. The children had gathered around Amy to watch the battle in the sky. None of them had ever seen a space fight before, and despite their fear, they were amazed by the display. The human ships were like bright stars weaving patterns against the darkness. Amy realized these must be the humans the Zeth had been talking about. She had never heard of humans being great warriors, but clearly the aliens had been wrong about them. The new arrivals fought with a skill and coordination that was breathtaking to watch. The first human ship to break through the alien defenses dove straight toward the planet. It was about the size of an elf patrol craft, but it moved like a hunting hawk. Amy watched it streak across the sky, leaving a trail of blue fire behind it. The ship targeted the massive weapon installation the Zeth had built in the central plaza. Amy had wondered what that device was for, but now she was about to find out in the worst way. The alien weapon was charging up and pointing at the sky, preparing to fire. But the human ship struck first. Its weapons hit the alien device with certain pinpoint accuracy. The explosion was so bright that Amy had to close her eyes. The shock wave shattered windows all across the city and knocked her to her knees. When Amy could see again, the weapon was gone, and a huge crater marked where it had been. The human ship was already climbing back toward space, apparently undamaged. Several Zeth aircraft gave chase, but they moved like elephants trying to catch a hummingbird. More human ships joined the attack, and Amy began to understand their strategy. Instead of fighting the alien fleet directly, they were targeting ground installations and supply lines. Every shot was precise and effective with no wasted effort. The Zeth were starting to panic. Amy could hear fear in their radio transmissions. As their carefully planned invasion fell apart, their ships were powerful but clumsy compared to the swift human vessels that struck and vanished like ghosts. Amy watched a group of 3 human fighters take on a Zeth battleship that was 10 times their size. The aliens fired everything they had but hit nothing, while the humans methodically destroyed the larger ship's weapons and engines. The battleship died slowly like a wounded giant. The ground troops were calling for evacuation as human fighters strafed their positions with devastating accuracy. Amy felt a fierce joy as she watched the cruel aliens run for cover like the cowards they really were. But the humans were not done yet. More ships kept arriving until the sky was full of them. They moved in complex patterns that made Amy dizzy to watch. Each formation had a specific purpose, and they executed their missions with mechanical perfection. Amy realized she was watching something historic. The humans were not just winning. They were demonstrating a level of military skill that would be talked about for generations. Every move was calculated. Every shot was perfect. Every formation was flawless. The largest Zeth ship tried to escape into hyperspace, but human interceptors were waiting. Amy watched the enemy flagship die in a ball of fire that lit up half the planet. The message was clear: there would be no mercy for those who showed none. Spark and flame were dancing in the air now, breathing streams of happy fire. 30 scales were brighter than Amy had ever seen them, as if they were reflecting the hope that was growing in her heart. The dragons had somehow known this moment would come. The battle was almost over. The few surviving Zeth ships were surrendering or fleeing while their ground forces threw down their weapons. Amy heard human voices on the communication device speaking in calm, professional tones as they coordinated the cleanup. One voice stood out from the rest. It belonged to a woman who spoke. With quiet authority, Amy could not understand the words, but she could hear the compassion in the tone. This was someone who cared about the people they had come to save. The children were cheering and crying at the same time. They had gone from certain death to miraculous rescue in just a few hours. Amy felt tears running down her face as she realized her world was free. The nightmare was over, but the real surprise came when human shuttles began landing near the tower. Amy had expected them to focus on military targets first. Instead, they were bringing medical supplies and rescue teams. The humans had come not just to fight, but to heal. Amy gathered the children and prepared to meet their rescuers. She had no idea what to expect from these legendary warriors who fought like angels of vengeance but moved with the precision of machines. All she knew was that they had saved her world when all hope was lost. The tower door opened, and figures in strange armor climbed the stairs. Amy held her breath as the first human removed their helmet, revealing a face that looked almost like an elf but different. The woman smiled and spoke in careful universal language. Amy knew in that moment that everything was going to be all right. The humans had not come as conquerors but as protectors. Their eyes held the same compassion Amy saw in healers and teachers. These were good people who had risked their lives for strangers. The human leader introduced herself as Captain Lisa Chen, and Amy was surprised by how young she looked. Despite commanding a fleet that had just defeated a galactic empire, Lisa seemed more like a school teacher than a warrior. Her eyes were kind, but there was steel underneath. Lisa knelt down to talk to the children at their eye level, speaking slowly in universal language. She had brought medical scanners and checked each child for injuries. Her team included doctors who began treating the wounded immediately with advanced equipment Amy had never seen before. Amy tried to thank Lisa for saving them, but the human captain shook her head and said they were just doing what anyone should do when innocent people were threatened. Lisa asked about other survivors, and Amy used the broken mirror to signal the hidden groups around the city. Within hours, human rescue teams had found and evacuated over 300 surviving elves. Amy was amazed by their efficiency. They had portable hospitals, medical robots, and supplies for thousands of people. Everything was organized with military precision, but delivered with gentle care. Spark and Flame were fascinated by the humans. The dragons flew around the rescue teams, chirping curiously while the soldiers took pictures and made notes. One human scientist was particularly excited and asked Amy many questions about dragon care and feeding habits. Amy learned that dragons were considered mythical by most galactic species. The humans had studied every report and legend but never seen living specimens. Lisa said the dragons were precious and should be protected at all costs, which made Amy feel proud and worried at the same time. The human medical team was amazed by Amy's healing abilities. They watched her use magic to close wounds and ease pain, taking careful notes and asking permission to record everything. Amy was happy to share her knowledge, especially when it helped her injured people. Dr. Kate Wilson was the chief medical officer, and she worked alongside Amy to set up treatment centers throughout the ruined city. Kate had studied alien biology for years, but elf magic was completely new to her. The two women quickly became friends despite the language barrier. Amy discovered that humans were incredible problem solvers. They could not use magic, but they had developed technology that could do almost anything. Their medical scanners could see inside a body without cutting it open, and their healing machines could regrow lost limbs. The children loved the human soldiers who gave them candy and showed them pictures of Earth on their communication devices. Amy learned that humans came from a blue and green world covered with oceans and forests. It sounded beautiful and peaceful. Captain Lisa explained that humans had formed something called the Terran Defense Force, specifically to protect weaker species from bullies like the Zeth Empire. They had sworn an oath to defend any innocent people who called for help, regardless of the cost. Amy asked why humans would risk their lives for strangers, and Lisa looked surprised by the question. She said it was simple. Humans believed that good people should help each other no matter what species they belonged to. Evil could only win if good people did nothing. The human fleet had tracked the Zeth invasion force across half the galaxy, following reports of destroyed worlds. They had been too late to save previous victims, but they had learned from each battle, making their tactics better and faster. Lisa showed Amy recordings from the space battle, and Amy was amazed by what she saw. The human ships moved like they were controlled by one mind, every pilot knowing exactly what the others would do. It was like watching a dance performed by hundreds of partners. Amy learned that human pilots trained together for years, developing an almost telepathic connection. They could communicate with tiny gestures and split-second timing. Their ships were extensions of their bodies rather than just machines they rode in. The human engineers were already working to rebuild Silvermoon, but they asked the elves what they wanted instead of imposing their own ideas. They brought tools that could regrow the living buildings and restore the crystal gardens to their former beauty. Amy watched human and elf children playing together despite not sharing a language. Kids could always find ways to communicate, and soon they were laughing and running around the rescue camps. The sight gave Amy hope for the future. Spark and Flame were growing visibly bigger each day, as if the stress and excitement had triggered something in their dragon nature. They were now the size of large dogs, and their fire was hot enough to melt metal. Amy worried about controlling them as they got bigger. Dr. Wilson suggested that Amy might want to visit Earth, where human experts could help her understand dragon biology better. There were universities that studied extinct species, and they might have insights about dragon growth and behavior. Amy was torn between wanting to help her dragons and not wanting to leave her recovering world. But Lisa assured her that the human fleet would stay until Silvermoon was completely rebuilt, and defended the Zeth Empire had been broken. But other threats existed. The humans had brought teachers and engineers along with their soldiers. They were setting up schools and workshops to share their knowledge with the elves. Amy realized this was not just a rescue mission but the beginning of a long friendship. Amy spent hours talking with Lisa about human culture and history. She learned that humans had faced their own dark periods, including wars and environmental disasters, but they had always found ways to overcome their problems by working together. Lisa was particularly interested in elf magic and healing arts. She said humans had always dreamed of such abilities, but had to rely on science and technology instead. The exchange of knowledge between their species could benefit everyone. Amy showed Lisa the fountain that had given her visions of the invasion. The human captain was fascinated and asked if it could predict other future events. Amy did not know, but she was willing to experiment with Lisa's help. The fountain responded to Lisa's presence, showing swirling images of human and elf ships traveling together through space. Amy saw scenes of cooperation and friendship that made her heart soar with hope for what was possible. Dr. Wilson had been studying the dragon eggs that Amy's grandmother had found, and she made an exciting discovery. The caves where the eggs were hidden contained minerals that were essential for dragon development. Those same minerals existed on Earth. Amy realized that her grandmother had been wiser than anyone knew. The old woman had somehow understood that the dragons would need to travel to human space to reach their full potential. It was as if fate had brought their species together. Captain, Lisa offered to take Amy and her dragons to Earth on the flagship after Silvermoon was secure. Amy was nervous about leaving her home, but she knew it was the right choice for Spark and Flame. They deserved the chance to become everything they were meant to be. Amy looked around at her healing world and felt grateful beyond words. The humans had given her people a second chance at life, and now they were offering her dragons a chance to fulfill their destiny. She knew this was just the beginning of a beautiful friendship. The survivors had lost all hope until humanity's vengeance rained from orbit. Now they had hope for tomorrow and dreams of flying among the stars with their new human friends. The future was bright with endless possibilities. 6 months later, Amy stood on the observation deck of the human flagship, watching Earth grow larger in the view screen. Her dragons were now the size of horses with magnificent wings that sparkled in the starlight. Spark and Flame had become the pride of the entire fleet. The journey to Earth had been amazing. Amy had seen wonders beyond imagination. Nebulae that painted space in brilliant colors, ancient space stations built by long-dead civilizations, and the bustling trade routes where dozens of species met to exchange goods and ideas. Captain Lisa had become like a sister to Amy during the long voyage. She taught Amy how to read star charts and understand the politics of galactic civilization. Amy learned that humans were respected throughout known space for their fairness and willingness to help others. The human crew loved having dragons aboard ship. Spark and Flame had learned to help with repairs using their fire to weld metal and their keen eyesight to spot problems. Dragons seemed to understand that they were part of the team and took their duties seriously. Dr. Wilson had been studying the dragons constantly and made remarkable discoveries. Dragon DNA contained genetic markers from dozens of extinct species, suggesting they were created by an ancient civilization as guardians of biological diversity. Amy learned that her grandmother's cave system connected to a vast underground network that stretched across multiple continents. The mineral deposits. They were not natural but carefully placed by whoever had hidden the dragon eggs. They had planned for this moment thousands of years ago. Earth was more beautiful than Amy had imagined. Blue oceans stretched between green continents while white clouds swirled in complex patterns. The planet looked alive and healthy. Despite supporting billions of humans, the sight made Amy homesick and hopeful at the same time. The humans had prepared a special facility for Amy and her dragons in the Rocky Mountains. The location had the right altitude and mineral content for dragon development, plus caves that reminded Amy of home. She would not be alone, either. Amy met Professor Rachel Martinez, who ran the Institute for Extinct Species Recovery. Rachel had spent her career bringing back animals that had died out, including mammoths, saber-toothed cats, and giant eagles. The work was slow but successful. Rachel was thrilled to work with living dragons and had already planned years of research. Amy would help care for the dragons while learning advanced biology and genetics. She could also teach Rachel about elf healing magic, creating a perfect partnership. Amy discovered that Earth had its own magical traditions, though humans called them by different names. Meditation, martial arts, and even music could channel life energy in ways similar to elf magic. The humans were not as powerless as other species believed. Spark and Flame loved Earth immediately. They soared through mountain valleys, chased clouds through blue skies, and swam in crystal-clear lakes. The dragons had never been so happy and healthy. Amy could see them growing stronger every day. Amy also met other refugees that humans had rescued from various disasters. There were plant people from gas giant moons, crystal beings from asteroid fields, and even energy creatures that lived in Starcore's Earth had become a haven for the displaced and endangered. The human government was unlike anything Amy had seen before. Instead of kings or emperors, they had elected representatives who served limited terms. Leaders could be removed if they failed to serve the people properly. It seemed chaotic, but somehow worked. Amy learned that humans had achieved something remarkable. They had ended poverty, disease, and war on their home planet through cooperation and shared technology. Every human had access to education, healthcare, and meaningful work. The society ran on trust and mutual respect. Amy received regular updates from Silvermoon through faster-than-light communication. The rebuilding was going perfectly with human and elf engineers working together. Her people were learning human technology, while humans studied elf magic and agriculture. Captain Lisa visited whenever her ship was near Earth, and she always brought news from across the galaxy. The Zeth Empire had completely collapsed after losing their invasion fleet. Other aggressive species were being much more careful about picking on weaker civilizations. Amy realized that the human rescue of Silvermoon had changed galactic politics forever. The message was clear: innocent people had powerful protectors now. Bullies and conquerors would face the full might of the Terran Defense Force if they harmed civilians. Spark and Flame were becoming local celebrities. Children from around the world came to visit the dragons and learn about conservation. Amy enjoyed teaching young humans about taking care of other species. It reminded her of her work in the Temple Professor. Rachel made another exciting discovery by studying Amy's DNA. She found genetic markers that were almost identical to human ones, suggesting that elves and humans had common ancestors millions of years ago. They were distant cousins, separated by space and time. Amy began working on a project to create a new type of medicine combining elf magic with human technology. The results were incredible. Diseases that had been incurable for centuries could now be healed in days. The research would help billions of people. Amy also started teaching magic to humans who showed natural ability. It turned out that many humans had dormant magical talents that just needed the right training. About 1 in 1,000 could learn basic healing and energy manipulation. The dragons continued growing and developing new abilities. Spark could now breathe different colored flames, each with unique properties, while Flame had developed the ability to sense emotional states in other beings. They were becoming more than just large flying reptiles. Amy received an invitation that changed everything. The Galactic Council wanted her to speak at their annual assembly about cooperation between species. Amy would be the first elf ever to address the council, and her dragons would accompany her as symbols of hope. Amy was nervous about speaking to representatives from hundreds of worlds, but Captain Lisa helped her prepare. The message was simple: different species could accomplish amazing things by working together instead of fighting or competing. The speech was a huge success. Amy told the story of Silvermoon's rescue and how humans had risked everything to save strangers. The dragons performed aerial displays that left the alien delegates speechless. Several worlds immediately requested human protection agreements. Amy returned to Earth knowing that she had helped change the galaxy forever. The age of strong species bullying weak ones was ending as more civilizations joined the human-led alliance. For mutual protection and cooperation, years passed and Amy split her time between Earth and Silver Moon, helping both worlds grow stronger. Her dragons had become fully mature. Magnificent creatures capable of carrying riders across continents, they were the first of a new generation. Amy often thought about her grandmother and wondered if the old woman had somehow known how everything would turn out. The dragon eggs had been waiting for exactly the right moment, when elves would need human help and humans would need the hope that dragons represented. Amy stood once again on a tower, but this time it was on Earth, looking up at stars that no longer seemed cold and distant. She knew that somewhere among those lights, her elf friends were, rebuilding their civilization with human help. Spark and Flame landed beside her, their scales reflecting the Earthlight. Their eyes held ancient wisdom but also joy for the present moment. Amy scratched their necks and they purred like giant cats, content with their place in the universe. The survivors had lost hope until humanity's vengeance rained from orbit. Now Amy was part of something bigger than any one world or species. She was helping to build a galaxy where good people protected each other and worked together for everyone's benefit. Amy smiled as shooting stars streaked across Earth's sky, knowing that many of them were actually ships carrying humans to distant worlds where they were needed. The age of heroes had begun, and dragons flew among the stars once more.